The quiet Distantiath story begins on a quiet evening in Los Angeles. The city lights were glowing like scattered stars on the ground, but in a small corner of the city, two people who had once shared laughter and unshakable trust now sat across from each other, surrounded by silence. Keanu Reeves leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful and distant, while Sandra Bullock kept her gaze low, her fingers moving nervously around the edge of her coffee cup. Years of friendship had carried them through storms, but now something had shifted, and both could feel it. The air between them was heavy. Keanu had always been a man who chose his words carefully. He was gentle, respectful, and often allowed others to step forward while he stayed in the background. But tonight, his silence was louder than words. Sandra wanted to ask why he seemed so far away, why he was stepping back just when she needed him close. But her pride held her tongue. She remembered the moments when he had lifted her spirits with nothing more than a quiet smile. The way his presence alone could calm a storm inside her. Yet here she was, facing him, unsure if that presence would remain. The truth was simple, though painful. Keanu had decided to step back, not out of anger, not out of lack of care, but because he believed Sandra needed space to find her own strength. He had seen the way she struggled with self-doubt, the way she carried the weight of expectations on her shoulders. He knew he could help, but he also knew that sometimes help becomes a crutch, and he respected her too much to let that happen. Stepping back was his way of showing faith in her, though it hurt him more than he could say. Sandra felt the distance like a cold wind. She thought back to the days when they worked side by side, when every challenge felt easier because he was near. There had been laughter, long hours of rehearsals, deep talks that lasted until dawn. He had seen her at her weakest, and he never judged. But now, as she looked at him, she realized something terrifying. She had come to rely on him too much. Her own voice, her own confidence, had grown quiet in the shadow of his steady support. And maybe, just maybe, this was why he was pulling away. Conflict burned inside her chest. Part of her wanted to beg him not to leave her side, not to become another name in the long list of people who had stepped away when things became hard. But another part of her, the part she rarely listened to, whispered that perhaps this was a test. Perhaps this was the moment when she was supposed to stand on her own, even if her knees trembled and her heart ached. Keanu's eyes softened as he watched her wrestle with unspoken words. He wanted to tell her that he would always be near, that his respect and care would never fade, but he also knew that promises sometimes weaken the fire people need to build within themselves. The night ended without answers. Sandra walked home under the dark sky, the city noise echoing around her. Every step felt heavy, but somewhere inside, she felt a small spark flicker. She realized that she had spent years being strong for others, but never truly believing in her own strength. And now, with Keanu stepping back, she had a choice. She could let the distance break her, or she could rise in a way she never had before. What she did not know was that this quiet distance, this painful pause, would become the start of a journey neither of them expected. A journey filled with trials, misunderstandings, deep emotions, and moments of raw truth. And though Keanu had stepped back, he would remain a silent force, guiding her not with hands that held, but with faith that believed. The rehearsal that changed the room morning came like a quiet drumbeat in Sandra's chest. Her phone buzzed before sunrise with a call she did not expect. A producer from a small studio said the lead actress was ill and they needed a strong voice for a live table read that afternoon. There would be cameras, a charity partner, and a room full of people who decided the future of projects with a nod or a frown. She had 4 hours to prepare, 4 hours to prove she could stand without a familiar hand at her back. The words that hooked into her heart were simple and sharp. "We need your steadiness," the producer said, "and your calm." Sandra stared at the wall for a long breath and then said yes. Fear was in her throat, but a steady yes still came. She walked into the studio with her shoulders low and her eyes soft. The lobby smelled like fresh paint and coffee. Quiet voices floated across the hall. A young assistant with wide eyes led her to a small green room where the script waited. The pages were thick and new. She took a seat and ran her finger along the first lines, whispering the words in an even rhythm to find their music. The story was about a woman who learned to listen before she spoke. A woman who learned to lead by standing one step back and inviting others forward. The theme struck her like a bell. She felt the echo inside her chest, bright and painful. She set a small timer and read the pages again, slow and steady, marking breaths with a soft pencil line and circling words that needed warmth. The director came in with a cool look and a notebook in his hand. His voice was neither kind nor unkind. It was careful. "We are tight on time," he said. "There is no space for a shaky start." Sandra nodded and said she understood. She did not promise perfection. She promised effort and focus. The director gave a short nod and left. She took another breath and stood. Before walking to the stage, she gathered the names of the crew she had met. She said thank you to each by name because she knew names mattered. They were small bridges you built before asking others to cross with you. The table read began with a circle of actors and a small audience of donors and staff. Cameras moved like quiet animals along the edges of the room. The first pages went by in a smooth wave. Sandra kept her voice low and clear, letting the words sit on the table like warm bread. Then the surprise came. Halfway through a heavy scene, the teleprompter used for stage directions went dark. A small panic rippled. The youngest actor lost his place and stared at his page with wide, frozen eyes. Silence opened like a hole in the floor. Sandra looked at him and did something simple. She leaned forward with a gentle smile and read her next line slower, placing a soft emphasis on the last word that cued his entrance. He caught the cue. His voice trembled for 2 beats, then found itself. The room exhaled in one breath. The director's pen stopped moving. A camera operator glanced up for the first time that day. The rhythm came back. Sandra kept giving small, invisible lifts to anyone who slipped. When a veteran actor rushed a monologue, she waited an extra beat before her reply, giving his words space to land. When the volunteer who played a small role dropped a line, she turned her face toward him and softened her answer as if the script had planned it. It looked effortless, but it was not easy. It took every ounce of focus she had. Kindness became craft. Patience became power. The reed moved forward with a new patience that felt like steady rain on a dry field. After the final page, there was no applause. There was only stillness, which can be better than clapping when a room is thinking. The director cleared his throat and looked at his notes. The producer thanked the donors. People stood and shifted and found their smiles again. The young actor, who had frozen earlier, came up to Sandra with wet eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "I thought I would drown." She put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You swam. That part is yours." The kindness landed not as a compliment but as a fact. The boy nodded and wiped his face with the back of his hand. He stood taller as he walked away. The director called Sandra into a side office. The room was small and smelled like dust and paper. He sat, tapped his pen, and spoke with honest edges. "We are not going to cast you as the lead for this readings. Follow up," he said. The words hit like cold water, but she kept her breathing even. He looked up to meet her eyes. "But I want you to come back for 2 weeks as our acting lead, not the star, the spine. Coach the room, hold the rhythm, make the others steady the way you did today." The request surprised her more than the rejection hurt her. It was not the role she had imagined, but it was a role made exactly for the person she was trying to become. She asked for a moment. She stepped into the hall and listened to the quiet inside herself. Pride wanted the spotlight. Humility looked at the team and saw a chance to build something that would last beyond her name. She went back in and said yes. The 2 weeks that followed did not look like movie magic. They looked like early call times, sore feet, and a notebook full of names and small goals. Sandra arrived before the first coffee and left after the last. Light went off. She brought tea to a grip who had a cough. She ran lines with the nervous volunteer in empty hallways until his voice stopped shaking. She listened to the veteran actor's story about his first stage fright and said thank you for trusting her with it. She asked the young assistant what part of the process she loved most and let that answer shape the way she arranged rehearsal breaks. She did not ask to be seen. She chose to see others. It made the room warmer. It made the work cleaner. One afternoon, after a tough scene where the whole cast had to breathe in unison before a key shift, the rhythm finally clicked. It was a small miracle. No one shouted. No one cheered. But there was a soft smile that moved from face to face like a candle being passed. Sandra felt tears at the edge of her eyes, not because it was perfect, but because they had built the moment together. The director caught her gaze across the room and gave a quiet nod. It was the first time she had seen a hint of warmth in his face. Respect does not always come wrapped in big speeches. Sometimes it is a nod held for one beat longer than usual. That evening, when she opened her bag to pull out her notebook, she found an envelope with no name. Inside was a single line written in clean handwriting. You are enough. Keep going. There was no signature. Her heart knew whose hand the letters resembled, but she did not chase the thought. The gift was not the note. The gift was the choice in front of her. She could spend energy hunting for proof that Keanu was still near, or she could use that energy to keep building the strength he believed she had. She slipped the note back into the envelope and placed it under the strap of her notebook so it would not get lost. Later that night, she stood at her kitchen counter with a glass of water and thought about sending a message to Keanu. She typed 3 times and erased 3 times. In the end, she wrote something small and true. Thank you for space. I am learning to stand. I hope you are well. She did not press send. She saved the words in her drafts and smiled. Sometimes the message you need to send is the message you need to hear from yourself. She put her phone down and made a simple dinner. Rice and eggs. Quiet food for a quiet victory. The next morning, the producer called with a new request that made her stomach flip. The charity wanted a public rehearsal at the end of the week. No teleprompter. A live audience. People would walk in and out, and the cast would have to hold attention the way a lighthouse holds ships. The director wanted Sandra to lead the warm-up, guide the pacing, and speak to the audience for 1 short minute about why stories matter. She said yes before fear could lift its voice. When the call ended, she pressed her palms to the counter and breathed. A minute can be longer than a lifetime when you are not used to taking the front of a room. But she had learned something important. Leading does not always mean standing taller. Sometimes it means standing steady and letting everyone else rise with you. On the day of the public rehearsal, the lobby hummed with footsteps and low chatter. Sandra gathered the cast in a loose circle. She asked them each to share one thing they were grateful for that morning. The answers were simple. Coffee, a ride that came on time, a mother's text, a full night of sleep. The circle softened. Then she led a breathing count that matched the hard scene they had been working on. In and out. Slow and even. When they walked on stage, the room felt like a shared heartbeat. Halfway through the rehearsal, as Sandra moved from the edge of the circle to the center to cue a shift, she sensed a change in the air, like a window opening behind the audience. She did not look up. She kept the rhythm, but the director's eyes flicked toward the back row and narrowed. The producer glanced too and smiled in surprise. There was someone in the last row, sitting very still, a cap pulled low, hands folded. The room did not know he was there, but the room felt steadier because he was. Sandra did not see him. Not yet. She only felt the space inside her expand as if a door had opened to a new hallway she had not known was there. The scene landed. The audience leaned in. The candle of shared work burned a little brighter. When the rehearsal ended, the director asked Sandra to stay behind for a quick note session. The others filed out. The producer closed the doors to block the hallway noise. The director looked at her with a new quiet in his face. "For the final night," he said, "we want you to do the opening 60 seconds alone, before the cast enters. Speak from yourself. No script." Her chest tightened and then softened. She nodded. She did not ask for more time. She did not ask for less pressure. She asked only one question. "What do you need the audience to feel at the end of my minute?" The director answered without thinking. "Scene," he said, "and steady." She smiled. "Then that is what I will give." Sandra left the stage and walked into the lobby to breathe. The lights were soft. The posters on the walls looked like old friends. She reached into her bag and touched the envelope to feel the edge of the paper. She did not open it. She did not need to. A voice inside her was louder now, and it said, a simple truth. You are not alone because you can hold yourself. A pair of footsteps approached and paused. She turned with a small, cautious smile, ready to greet whoever needed her attention. She looked up, and her breath caught for one beat, then evened out again, like a trained line read. The 60 seconds the night of the final performance arrived, with a weight that Sandra felt in her bones. The theater was not enormous, but the rows of chairs, the glow of the stage lights, and the hum of voices created a storm inside her chest. Outside, the city was alive with horns and footsteps, but inside this room, silence waited for her voice. The cast was backstage, whispering warm-up lines and shaking their hands loose. Sandra stood at the edge of the curtain, her palms damp, her notebook pressed against her ribs. She had 60 seconds alone before anyone else entered the stage. 60 seconds that could either ground the room or break it. She closed her eyes. She remembered the young actor who had frozen and found his courage. She remembered the cough of the grip who had still shown up every day. She remembered the quiet nod from the director when their breathing had finally fallen into rhythm. She let those memories fill her, because they were proof that moments can hold people steady. She breathed once, twice, and then the curtain rose. A soft light wrapped around her shoulders. She walked to the center of the stage with steps that were steady, though her legs trembled inside. The first row leaned forward, curious. The back row shifted in their seats. She took in the room with her eyes, not rushing, not hiding. She spoke with a voice low and clear. Stories are not only lines on a page, she began. They are mirrors, and sometimes they are windows. They let us see ourselves, and they let us see others. When you sit here tonight, I ask only one thing. Let the story move through you the way music moves through a quiet room. Let it remind you that you are not alone. The room softened. Even those who had entered with restless energy settled back into their seats. She felt at the moment when silence was no longer empty, but full. She had 60 seconds, but she only needed 40. She paused, let the words rest, and then bowed her head slightly as the cast entered behind her. The play unfolded with grace, though not without flaws. A missed cue, a stumble, a light that flickered too late. Yet the mistakes did not tear the fabric. Instead, they became threads in a larger cloth, held together by the patience that Sandra had nurtured in the room. When her scene came, her voice did not rise above the others. It blended, steady and sure, giving the younger actors a rhythm to follow. But halfway through, something shifted. A donor in the third row coughed loudly and stood to leave. The sound cracked the air. For a moment, eyes darted, voices faltered. Sandra stepped forward, not with lines, but with presence. She raised her chin slightly and waited for the door to close, then took her next line with a calm strength that wrapped the pause in dignity. The room followed. Tension broke, the audience leaned back in, and the play found its heartbeat again. After the final bow, the applause came not as a roar, but as a long, steady wave. It was the kind of applause that spoke of respect rather than excitement. Sandra bowed with the cast, her eyes catching each face around her. She saw pride, relief, and something deeper. They trusted her not as a star, but as a steady center. Backstage was full of hugs and small tears. The young actor pressed his forehead to hers for a brief moment, whispering, "You made us brave." She squeezed his hand and whispered back, "You made yourself brave." The director approached with his notebook closed, a rare smile on his lips. "You gave them more than a performance," he said quietly. "You gave them space." When the crowd had left and the cast had drifted home, Sandra returned to the empty stage. The lights were dimmed, the seats bare. She walked to the center, placed her notebook on the floor, and sat cross-legged beside it. She wanted to feel the quiet, without applause, without expectation. She let herself breathe there until the silence became a friend. And then she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the back of the theater. She turned her head, and in the half-light of the empty seats, a figure stepped forward. Cap pulled low, jacket simple, hands at his sides. Keanu Reeves moved with his usual quiet grace, the kind that filled a room without effort. He stopped at the edge of the stage, looking at her with soft eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was not heavy this time. It was steady, like the silence before the first note of a song. Sandra smiled faintly, her heart both aching and steadying at once. "You were here," she said, her voice low. Not a question, but a truth. He nodded. "I was." Her throat tightened, but she kept her breath even. "You stepped back." "I did," he said softly, "because I believed you could stand. And tonight, you did." Sandra lowered her gaze, then lifted it again, meeting his eyes with something stronger than before. "I thought I would fall," she admitted, "but I found I could hold steady. Not because I was fearless, but because I let the fear walk with me." Keanu's lips curved in a quiet smile. That is strength. The moment hung there, fragile and powerful. The stage lights above them hummed. The city outside pulsed with life. But here, in this space, there was only truth. She had not won fame tonight, nor a shining review. What she had won was her own voice, steady and real, and the respect of a man who had trusted her enough to step back. The critics shadowed, morning after the performance. Sandra woke to the soft light of dawn creeping through her window. Her body ached with the exhaustion of weeks of rehearsal, but her heart carried a strange calm. She had stood steady in front of strangers. She had carried the rhythm of a room, and Keanu had seen her do it. The memory lingered like a warm ember, yet peace is often short. As she reached for her phone, a storm began to brew. Her screen was filled with messages from friends, emails from producers, and links to articles. The headlines were sharp, each one cutting in its own way. One critic had written a long review that spread quickly through morning feeds. It praised the cast as promising, but dismissed the performance as uneven, pointing directly at Sandra as the weak center. "She tries too hard to lead, yet her presence feels unsure," the review read. "A voice that wants to guide but does not know where to go." The words sank like stones in her chest. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled, reading comment after comment. Strangers echoed the critic's voice, some kind, some cruel. She closed her eyes, fighting the heat that rose to her face. Had the applause been a lie? Had the respect she felt in the room been only in her imagination? Doubt crept in like a slow poison. She forced herself to put the phone down and stood in front of the mirror. Her reflection looked back with tired eyes, hair tangled from restless sleep. She whispered, "You were steady." But even as she said it, the critic's words echoed louder. The fear she thought she had learned to carry now felt heavier than before. Later that day, she walked into rehearsal with her shoulders squared, but the weight showed in her eyes. The younger actors sensed it first. The boy she had once guided through his freeze-up hesitated before greeting her. The director gave notes quickly, avoiding her gaze. Whispers floated around the room. The critic's shadow had entered with her, unseen yet loud. During a break, Sandra stepped into the hallway, pressing her back against the wall. She closed her eyes, breathing slow, but her chest tightened. She felt footsteps approach, and when she looked up, Keanu was there. No cap. No shadows this time. His presence was quiet, but firm, like a tree rooted deep. "You read it," he said softly, not a question. She nodded. "They said I was unsure, that I wanted to lead, but didn't know where to go." He tilted his head, studying her with steady eyes. "And do you believe that?" Her voice cracked. "I don't know anymore. Last night I felt strong, but today, their words are louder than mine." Keanu stepped closer, his tone low but clear. "Critics see from the outside. They catch only a glimpse, a surface. But I saw the inside. I saw you hold a room steady. I saw you carry fear without letting it break you. Tell me, which voice do you choose to believe?" Sandra swallowed hard. Her throat burned with unshed tears. "It's easier to believe the harsh ones." He nodded slowly, "because harshness is louder, but truth does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers, like your voice on that stage." His words pierced through. The noise, not as a shield, but as a reminder. She realized then that strength was not about being untouched by criticism. It was about not letting criticism become the only voice in the room. The next rehearsal was heavier, but Sandra made a choice. When the young actor forgot his lines again, she did not freeze. She guided him gently, her voice soft but steady. When the veteran rushed, she gave him space. She chose to focus not on the critic's shadow, but on the people in front of her. By the end of the day, the cast gathered around her with quiet gratitude. The young actor whispered, "Don't listen to them, we see you." The director finally met her eyes, his nod longer than before. That night, back at home, she sat with her notebook. She pulled out the envelope with the simple "Notes you are enough. Keep going." She placed the critic's article beside it. Two voices, side by side, one harsh, one kind. She looked at them for a long while, then slid the article into the trash. The note she kept. Before she slept, she wrote in her notebook, "Strength is not silence of critics. Strength is choosing the voice that builds, not breaks." Outside, the city lights burned steady. Inside, her own light began to steady too. The role she did not expect a week passed, and the noise of the critic's shadow began to fade. Sandra poured her focus into the rehearsals, guiding the cast with patience, and slowly the room grew stronger. She thought the storm had passed, but storms often circle back when you least expect them. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, her phone rang with a number she did not recognize. She almost ignored it, but something inside told her to answer. The voice on the other end introduced himself as a producer from a large studio preparing a new feature film. Sandra listened, her heart pounding as the man explained. They wanted her for a role, an unusual one. It was not the glamorous lead, not the sweet companion. It was a complex character, a woman who fails in the public eye, collapses under criticism, and then slowly finds her strength to rise again. The producer's words hit her like an arrow. "We saw you in the charity performance," he said. "You carried something real. You weren't flawless, and that is what made you powerful. We need that truth." Sandra's first instinct was disbelief. Was this a cruel trick? She almost asked if he had read the critic's review. Instead, she kept her voice calm. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Because we don't want someone who pretends," the producer replied. "We want someone who knows what it feels like to break and still chooses to stand." After the call, she sat in silence, her hands trembling. She had spent days battling the voice of a critic who called her unsure. Now someone else was asking her to use that very uncertainty as art. The irony pressed heavy against her chest. That evening, she met Keanu in a quiet corner of a small cafe, the kind with dim lights and old wooden chairs. She told him about the offer, her voice uncertain. They want me to play someone who breaks, someone who fails. What if I am only good at failing? Keanu listened without interruption. He stirred his tea slowly, his calm eyes fixed on her. When she finished, he spoke with his usual quiet strength. Failing is not the same as breaking. Failing means you tried. Breaking means you stopped trying. You haven't stopped. She frowned. But the role, it feels too close. It feels like they're asking me to put my weakness on display. Maybe they are, Keanu said gently. But weakness shown with honesty becomes strength for someone else. People need to see that. They need to know it's possible to stand again after falling. His words settled deep into her heart. She realized the role was not a trap. It was an invitation to turn her pain into something others could recognize and find courage in. Sandra accepted the offer. The script arrived 2 days later. The pages were raw, filled with heavy scenes of doubt and silence, of whispered courage and quiet resilience. Every line felt like it had been written with her in mind. At first, she read with trembling hands, afraid of what she might see, reflected back. But as the days passed, she found herself breathing into the lines, shaping them with her truth. The first table read of the film was tense. The cast included big-names actors who had graced magazine covers and award stages. Sandra felt small in their presence. Whispers circled the room, some doubting her ability, others curious about her sudden rise. She opened her notebook and reminded herself of her written line, "Strength is choosing the voice that builds, not breaks." When her turn came to read, she let the words flow slow and steady, not perfect, not polished, but real. The room grew still. Even the star, who had walked in late, set down his phone and listened. Her voice carried the truth of someone who had been wounded, but refused to hide the scar. By the end of the session, the director pulled her aside. His tone was low, almost reverent. "That," he said, "was the sound of someone standing again. Hold on to it." That night, Sandra walked home under the city lights. She did not text Keanu right away. She wanted to carry the victory quietly, to let it sink in. But as she reached her door, she found a folded note slipped under the frame. The handwriting was familiar. "I knew you could. Keep going." She smiled, tears pressing at the edges of her eyes. She whispered into the night, "Thank you," though she knew he might never hear it. And so began a new chapter 1, where her greatest challenge was no longer the critic outside, but the mirror within. The breaking point on set filming began 2 months later, and at first it moved like steady waves. Sandra woke before sunrise, arrived on set with her notebook, and carried her role with patience. She was not the brightest star in the cast, but she became the quiet anchor. The director trusted her to bring a scene to life with stillness. The crew respected her kindness, and the younger actors leaned on her for guidance. She thought she had found her rhythm again, but rhythm has a way of being broken when eyes that do not care are watching. The film drew attention from the press. Cameras gathered outside the studio gates, waiting to snap faces, waiting to spin stories. The critic who had once cut her down returned, this time writing that her casting was a sympathy stunt, claiming she was not ready for a role of such depth. The words spread fast, whispered across sets, echoed in the side conversations of co-stars. One day, in the middle of a long shoot, the tension finally cracked. Sandra had a heavy scene. Her character was meant to collapse on the floor after receiving devastating news. The director wanted it raw, unpolished, a moment that felt too real to be staged. She prepared all morning, sinking into the quiet pain the scene demanded. When the cameras rolled, she let herself break open. Her knees hit the ground, her breath came ragged, her hands shook. Silence filled the set. For a moment, she thought, she had given them everything then, from the shadows A co-star smirked and whispered loud enough for others to hear. Pathetic. She's not acting. She's just showing her weakness. The words pierced her chest. Laughter followed from two extras. The silence shattered. Her breath caught. Her face burned. And for the first time since she had taken the role, she stood, too quickly, breaking the scene. The director called cut with frustration in his voice. The weight of the critic's shadow. The whispers of co-stars. The laughter, all of it rushed back at once. She felt as if the walls of the set had closed around her. She excused herself quietly and walked out, her footsteps heavy, her chest tight. She found herself outside, leaning against the back wall of the studio, where the air smelled faintly of smoke and asphalt. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed her hands against her eyes, ashamed of the crack in her armor. "You're not pathetic," a voice said softly. She lowered her hands and turned. Keanu was there, as if the world had placed him in the exact spot she needed him most. He wore no disguise, no cap, no shadow. His presence was steady, his eyes calm. "They're right," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm not acting, I'm just breaking." He stepped closer, his tone gentle but strong. "And what's wrong with that? The role you're playing is not about being perfect. It's about being human, about breaking and still standing again. You are not weak for showing it. You are strong for letting others see it." Her shoulders shook, but slowly her breath steadied. It hurt so much to hear them laugh. Keanu nodded, his voice low. "Because they don't understand. But understand this, you have already stood in silence. You have already carried a room. You have already risen against words sharper than theirs. Do not let their laughter write your story." She wiped her tears, staring at him with wide, searching eyes. "Then, what is my story?" He gave a faint smile. "Your story is the one you choose, every day. Today you chose to walk out instead of break further. Tomorrow you choose to walk back in and give the scene again. Not for them, not for the critic, for yourself." Her chest ached, but there was a warmth in his words that reached the deepest part of her. She nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, I'll go back." The next morning, she walked onto set with steady steps. Whispers rose again, but she ignored them. When it was time for the heavy scene, she let herself collapse once more. Her knees hit the floor, her breath trembled, her hands shook, but this time, she did not rise too quickly. She let the silence hold. When the director called cut, the room was different. No laughter, no whispers, only stillness, heavy and real. The director walked up to her with quiet eyes. "That," he said, "was truth. That's what we needed." And though her body still trembled, she stood with a strength that was no longer borrowed. It was hers. That night, back home, Sandra opened her notebook and wrote one line. "Strength is not hiding the break. Strength is choosing to rise again, in front of those who hope you will not." Outside, the world was loud with critics and cameras, but inside, her light burned steadier than before. The premiere night months passed, and the film neared completion. Every day on set had tested Sandra in ways she never thought possible. She had faced laughter, whispers, long hours, and the constant shadow of doubt. Yet with every scene, she had chosen to rise. The scars inside her had not disappeared, but they had shaped her into something steadier. When filming wrapped, the cast hugged, the crew clapped, and the director placed a hand on her shoulder. "You gave us truth," he said simply. Soon after, the studio announced a premiere night. It would not be as large as the glittering Hollywood spectacles, but it would still draw cameras, reporters, critics, and fans. Sandra felt a weight settle on her shoulders as the date drew closer. This was the night the world would watch, the night the critic would write again, the night whispers might turn into shouts. On the evening of the premiere, she stood in front of the mirror in a simple black dress. She did not cover herself with glitter or gold. She wanted to walk into that theater, as herself, no masks, no armor. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the small necklace at her throat, a gift from her late mother, a reminder of quiet strength. She whispered to her reflection, "You are enough." Outside, flashes of cameras lit the street like lightning. Reporters shouted names, microphones stretched forward, and actors smiled for the lights. Sandra stepped from the car slowly, her breath even, her heart steady. Questions flew around her, some kind, some sharp. "Do you feel ready for tonight? What do you say to those who call your casting a mistake?" She paused for one beat, then answered softly, "I say that stories are not about perfection. They're about truth. Tonight, that's what you'll see." The crowd fell quiet for a moment. Her calm voice carried further than a sharp reply ever could. Inside the theater, the lights dimmed and the film began. Sandra sat in the middle row, her hands folded in her lap. As her scenes unfolded on the screen, her chest tightened. She watched herself collapse, cry, and tremble, but she also watched herself rise. For the first time, she saw not failure, but courage. When the final scene faded to black, the room was still. Then applause rose, not the polite clapping of formality, but a deep, steady wave that filled the space. People stood, some with tears in their eyes. Sandra lowered her head, overwhelmed, her throat thick with emotion. After the film, reporters rushed forward, and critics scribbled notes. The same critic who had once called her unsure now stood in the lobby, pen in hand. He caught her eye, and, for the first time, did not look dismissive. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "I was wrong. What you gave tonight was not weakness. It was strength." He walked away before she could answer, leaving her stunned as the crowd thinned. Sandra stepped outside into the cool night air. The city hummed around her, alive and bright. She walked a few steps away from the lights and leaned against a quiet wall. For the first time in years, she felt not small, but whole. Then she heard footsteps, soft and familiar. Keanu appeared beside her, his presence calm as ever. He looked at her with gentle eyes. No need for long speeches. "You stood," he said simply. She smiled, her eyes wet. "I did." He tilted his head. "And how do you feel now?" She took a slow breath, her chest lighter than it had been in months. "I feel enough." They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the city lights shimmer. No grand words, no applause, no cameras, just two souls who had walked through storms, one stepping back so the other could step forward. And for Sandra, that was the real victory, not the critics' praise, not the applause, but the quiet truth that she had found her strength, and it was hers to keep.